Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. For the longest time, the smartphone industry honestly felt like it was stuck on repeat, right? Every single year, we got a slightly faster, maybe slightly thinner, flat glass rectangle. But then, a massive paradigm shift happened. Today, we're going to trace the fascinating evolution of Samsung's foldable universe. We'll go from those early prototypes, and yeah, we all remember those bulky early attempts, all the way to the mind-bending, futuristic devices that are completely redefining today's tech landscape. Because really, if you want to understand where mobile technology is heading, you have to understand how we actually learn to fold glass.
It's a profound question to think about. What happens when the smartphone stops being a flat piece of glass? For over a decade, app developers, hardware engineers, and, well, everyday users like you and me, we based our entire digital lives around a static, rigid screen. When you suddenly introduce a hinge into that equation, you aren't just changing the physical shape of a piece of tech, you are entirely reimagining how we interact with information. You're changing how we multitask, how we consume media, and how we literally carry our digital worlds in our pockets. Physical shape has absolutely become the new frontier of mobile innovation.
So let's go back to the very beginning, the dawn of the foldable phone.
To completely shatter that standard smartphone mold, it required a massive leap in engineering. And looking back, it's wild to see just how incredibly fast it moved. Back in 2018, Samsung teased us with the Galaxy X prototype. Now, it was heavily disguised, sure, but it proved that the concept of a bending screen was actually finally viable. Just 1 year later, in 2019, the original Galaxy Fold officially launched to the public. It was a bold and, let's be honest, very expensive first step. But then in 2020, things really solidified. Samsung introduced the clamshell-style Galaxy Z Flip and officially created the Galaxy Z series umbrella to house all of their future foldable devices. In just 3 years, an experimental, behind-closed-doors prototype became a fully unified product category.
Emerging from that 2020 umbrella, we start to see two very distinct branching paths in Samsung's foldable philosophy. On one side, you have the book-style foldables. That's the Z Fold line. This opens vertically, kind of like a novel, to reveal a massive internal screen. It's totally targeted at power users who want maximum productivity and just a ton of screen real estate. But then, on the other side, you have the clamshell-style foldables, the Z Flip line. This one folds horizontally. It takes a standard-sized smartphone and literally snaps it down into an ultra-portable, pocket-friendly little square. It's two completely different physical shapes, solving two completely different consumer desires.
Let's dig a little deeper into that book style first, the Z Fold, the pocket tablet.
Now, what's really interesting here is how fast the growing pains of early adoption just vanished. For users who wanted to carry a full-fledged tablet experience that could still slide right into a jacket pocket, the evolution was rapid. Think about it. The original Fold back in 2019 had a standard 60 Hz display and ran on a Snapdragon 855 Plus. Groundbreaking for the time, absolutely. But the leap to the Z Fold 2 was crucial. That's when we saw the introduction of the high refresh rate 120 Hz folding screen and significantly minimized bezels. It finally made the device feel truly premium. Fast forward to the Z Fold 6 and you're looking at absolute top-tier performance with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy. The internal hardware had finally caught up to the massive ambition of that folding screen.
And it wasn't just the processors evolving either. The camera technology matured right alongside it. The original Fold was perfectly capable. It had a 12, 12, and 16 megapixel array that could shoot 4K video. But as the form factor became more mainstream, Samsung started packing in true flagship optics. By the Z Fold 6, we see a massive 50 megapixel main sensor capable of shooting 8K video at 24 frames per second. And then by the Z Fold 7, that 8K video capability smooths out even further to 30 frames per second. We're talking about your everyday home videos suddenly being shot in Hollywood-level cinematic quality. The Fold completely transformed from an experimental novelty into a premium professional-grade media creation tool.
But what about the other side of the family tree, the Z Flip, and the great clamshell comeback?
Z Flip brilliantly tapped into our pure, undeniable nostalgia for the old snapping flip phone. But underneath that retro feel, it was a massive engineering breakthrough. Unlike the early plastic screens we saw, the Z Flip utilized a hybrid glass coating that Samsung branded as the Infinity Flex display. Think about that for a second. Bending glass. It sounds like a magic trick, or maybe just a really terrible idea, right? But this flexible glass cover meant the Z Flip not only had that incredibly satisfying vertical fold, but it actually felt like a premium modern smartphone to the touch, rather than some fragile prototype you had to baby. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the absolutely toughest challenges in mobile tech space. When you fold a phone entirely in half, where on earth do you put the battery?
While the original Z Flip LTE managed a 3300 mAh battery alongside its Snapdragon 855 Plus. But Samsung was relentless about optimizing those internals. By the Z Flip 4, they pushed the capacity to 3700 mAh using the highly efficient Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. And looking at the Z Flip 7, they've somehow packed a massive 4300 mAh battery and an Exynos 2500 processor into that tiny foldable square. It is nothing short of a masterclass in internal component packaging.
Now, as the Galaxy series climbed to global dominance, an entirely unexpected challenge arose, highlighting a unique problem with the Z naming convention. It's a really striking example of how real-world geopolitical events can directly and very suddenly impact a global technology brand's product naming. In March of 2022, Samsung made a swift operational change in Eastern Europe. The company began a rebranding effort for their Fold and Flip devices specifically in Ukraine, Moldova, and the Baltic states, which includes Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. In these specific markets, Samsung dropped the Z branding entirely from the names of the devices, opting to just sell them straightforwardly as the Galaxy Fold and the Galaxy Flip. The context for this business decision is directly rooted in the events of that time. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine in early 2022, the letter Z began being used as a prominent symbol by the Russian military and subsequently as a pro-war symbol by the Russian government. So, to navigate this incredibly sensitive geopolitical landscape, Samsung adapted its marketing strategy regionally. They did this to ensure their flagship product lines weren't inadvertently associated with military symbolism. It's a fascinating, real-time look at the complexities of global brand management. So, all of this history brings us to a crucial realization. Enter the Z Trifold. Let's move to and see how this builds, because everything we've looked at so far, the Fold, the Flip, they were ultimately just stepping stones. They were the proving ground for the ultimate climax in mobile engineering that arrived in December 2025, the Samsung Galaxy Z Trifold. And you know, this wasn't just an overnight surprise. The road to the Trifold was carefully, meticulously paved. Way back at CES 2022, Samsung actually quietly displayed their Flex S and Flex G trifolding concepts behind glass. Then, at the January 2025 Galaxy Unpacked event, they finally teased a trifolding phone on their official product roadmap. And after months of fierce speculation, December 2025 brought the official press release. The rumors were entirely real. And the specs on this newly released device? They are nothing short of staggering. The Z Trifold is a true flagship beast. It's driven by the top-tier Snapdragon 8 Elite processor, backed up by a frankly ridiculous 16 gigabytes of RAM. Think about that. That's likely more memory than the laptop you're using right now. Storage ranges from 512 gigabytes up to a full terabyte. It features a stunning tri-camera setup spearheaded by a massive 200-megapixel main sensor, and the whole shebang ships running the bleeding-edge Android 16 operating system. They didn't just casually add a third screen. They maxed out absolutely every conceivable specification. 10.0, that is the magic number here. When you completely unfold the Z Trifold, you are greeted by a 10.0-inch internal dual dynamic AMOLED 2X display pushing a buttery-smooth 120Hz refresh rate. Just to put that into perspective for a second, that is the size of a standard standalone tablet fully integrated into a device that you can fold up into a Z shape and slide right into your pocket. It completely seamlessly bridges the gap between your phone, your e-reader, and your primary productivity tablet.
5600. Now, of course, running 3 distinct display panels and a Snapdragon 8 Elite processor requires an immense, almost unbelievable amount of power. So Samsung engineered a massive 5600 mAh battery into the slender chassis of the Trifold. When you consider that they had to perfectly balance the weight, the thickness, and the heat dissipation across multiple folding hinges, all without turning your pants pocket into a literal furnace, packing a 5600 mAh capacity into this device is honestly just as impressive as the screens themselves.
Which brings us to our final thought. From that clunky, heavily disguised Galaxy X prototype back in 2018 to a 10-inch tri-folding supercomputer in 2025, the sheer pace of this change is breathtaking. So, what form factor will dominate the next decade of mobile tech? Is the Trifold the final destination for the smartphone, or is it just another beginning on the way to rollable screens or maybe even wearable holograms? One thing is for sure, the era of the flat, boring piece of glass is officially behind us. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the future.